Hello, welcome and thank you for watching this video, the last video in this part A of the Light for the Path videos. We will talk about the media and we'll include some closing thoughts. Where have the news media been through all of this regarding the subjects we've been discussing in these videos? While we're considering that, perhaps it would be a good time to debunk the idea that the news media is very liberally biased in both the intent and the content of its reporting. As long as the news media are not totally parroting the political line of the complaining party, the party that claims that the media is liberally biased, or unless the media are rallying around the conservative agenda, then according to the conservatives, they undoubtedly must be biased toward the liberal point of view and against the conservative point of view. There may be many people within the media who are liberal in their political leanings. I know that there are a great many in the reporting structure and so forth that are conservative in their political leanings. But I'm talking about the corporate structure of the media and the leanings of the structure as a whole, the kind of media that's controlled by people like Rupert Murdoch. If all of this that I'm talking about weren't so tragic because of the large number of people who actually believe it, it would be laughable. If a few in the media should even try to be the least bit objective, which happens all too seldom, then of course they are once again biased. This is the same news media that has such a huge percentage of itself controlled and owned, lock, stock, and barrel by a few of the very largest corporate conglomerates in the United States and around the world. I feel relatively certain that even though their executives may not be coming down into the newsroom and telling the news team what they can say and what they can't say, you can trust me when I tell you that without being told, those running the newsrooms know precisely what they can say and what to leave unsaid, and they are not foolish enough to antagonize those upstairs by stepping over that invisible but all too well-known line. When those who are at the top of the political heap bend and misrepresent the truth in their public statements, those in charge of the nation's major newsrooms usually know that the truth has been bent and misrepresented to the American people. They sometimes call it spin. But if they say anything at all about it, which doesn't always happen, they will often say it very vaguely or guardedly to avoid stepping over that line. Regardless of the administration in power at any given time, the news media know what the truth is most of the time. But the managers of the media outlets also know better than to point out too openly the discrepancies in the statements made by political leaders. Instead, what they will often do in the interest of so-called fairness is put someone on from each side of the generally two points of view and let them each present their argument for a brief period. Both speakers are usually very eloquent and persuasive, and as a result, at the conclusion of their discussion, the average viewers have no idea what the truth really is. And in frustration, they turn on the latest reality show, sitcom, ball game, game show, whatever. There are a few individual shows or sources within the media that are exceptions, but such shows and sources are not commonplace. To the shame of those in the control of the television newsrooms while watching them on C-SPAN a few years ago during a televised meeting in which they were comparing notes with one another, I heard several of them say that they continue with certain stories sometimes for weeks and even months after they have stopped being news, if they ever were really news, because the polls continue to show that this story caused their viewership to rise and therefore their bottom line to improve. I guess they're thinking, who really cares about the real issues that are going unreported day after day? Not them. Especially if they can make the bigger bucks by rehashing some far less worthy so-called story. Too much of the time the public doesn't even realize that the majority of the really important substantive issues often go virtually unreported in the United States media. As a result, many people have learned to use the internet to access English language news sources in other countries. It's sad also that too often, too many in the viewing public are happy if they can hear today's soundbite, catch up on the latest scandal, watch the most recent reality show or sitcom, and see that night's ball game. As long as they can be kept content through this entertainment, some of which definitely appeals to the lowest common denominator among us, then they don't see any reason why they should be clamoring for change. At least not real change, and perhaps not any change at all. Unfortunately, what they don't know is hurting them. It's hurting all of us in very significant ways. One can sometimes gain greater knowledge about how some of these problems have manifested in our society by selectively reading newspapers or by selectively watching certain shows or channels on television. The local, national, and international newspapers, as indicated earlier, can also be a source of worthwhile information if one reads selectively and carefully. The New York Times, the London Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Times of India, among others, are available online if one has internet access. When read carefully, again selectively, they can be very helpful. I often benefit also by watching on television those shows or channels whose content generally includes a subject of civic interest. There are only a few of good quality, and of these I consider PBS and C-SPAN to be among the best. If the viewer chooses selectively, you must be careful what you watch, because there's also a lot of garbage out there. I also recommend selective viewing on Link TV. That's channel 9410 on the Dish Network, I believe, and channel 375 on DirecTV. And I also recommend Free Speech TV, FSTV, channel 9415 on Dish Network, and channel 348 on DirecTV. Again, you must watch selectively. For those who watch PBS, you're already aware that they are continually airing many excellent documentaries, as well as evening news and other programs that inform and educate the viewers in many areas of public interest. It's my feeling that among the best of those shows is the program that was, and for all I know may still be, headed by Bill Moyers. I think Bill may have retired. A sincere man who believes in taking the side of the people instead of taking the side of the corporate interests, as is done by so many other shows. If you can watch any show that was created by Bill Moyers or that includes his guest and his point of view, you're going to watch something that's going to be worthwhile. I also find that sometimes there are Frontline documentaries, the show called Frontline, that are generally very well done. I often find Dennis Holy's show, This Is America, to be worthwhile. That was even more so at some time in the past than it is more currently, but I'll say also that I find the Charlie Rose show to be very enlightening from time to time, depending on the guests and the subject matter. I'm sometimes saddened by the fact that such shows as these mentioned do not have a mass audience like those audiences that seem to be drawn to shows that are less civic-minded and more oriented toward entertainment only. The hosts of the shows mentioned earlier, with worthwhile information and guests, have the ability to provide extremely important information in a format and manner that are both interesting and worthwhile, and that can go a long way towards helping to educate the viewers about the problems and dangers that are present as a result of what is happening in our country. Unfortunately, the shows headed by Bill Moyers, Frontline, some of the guests on the Charlie Rose show, and Dennis Holy's This Is America seem to be only some of a very few voices crying out in the broadcasting wilderness from PBS. And I found little, if anything, similar on mainstream television. Even further from the TV mainstream, but still at times very enlightening, are certain shows, as I mentioned earlier, on FSTV, Link, UCTV, and UWTV, if the viewer is selective. These channels also are certainly worth checking from time to time, and I encourage you to do so, selecting those shows which are of interest to you. You can sometimes learn a great deal on Democracy Now! And on the Thom Hartmann Show. There are also numerous worthwhile documentaries that will enlighten you in a number of areas that may be of interest. Excuse me. As with any media, I don't always agree with everything that the newspapers, as well as the television shows, including the shows on the channels that I've mentioned here, have to say. But by selective and judicious observation, you can still learn a great deal that is very worthwhile and which you are not likely to learn from the mainstream media. You may want to go back and watch an episode of The Charlie Rose Show that took place in the summer of 2010, on which Richard Armitage appeared, and you can discover which news stations he watches and why he does so. You might be surprised. Such enlightening television is generally not found on mainstream channels. What a shame. Sadly, far too many of us are filled with apathy to the point that we don't want to know what's happening, especially if it means that we might somehow need to think or become involved, even if that only means paying attention for a little while to what's going on in the country. Let's now consider a few closing thoughts. The issues that we've been considering in these videos in Part A of Light of the Path, and the ways in which they relate to individual freedoms, individual rights, and the means by which to improve the quality of life for working families, are all very serious and important matters that have sometimes greatly divided the people of our country. As usual, there are some who are always ready to either create division or take advantage of the opportunity to widen divisions among us, or to use such divisions whenever they occur to once again take advantage of the old adage, divide and conquer, or divide and rule. When our forefathers were thinking about the formation of the American government, they knew of the benefit and the need to have our country's government reflect policies of inclusion on behalf of our fellow countrymen. They put down these words: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Those words should be sufficient to erase any doubts that are still around. Are you still willing, knowing what you know now, to continue to allow those few who are motivated by greed and a lust for power to stand in the way of these undeniable truths? Are you still willing to allow them to keep us divided as a people for their own selfish purposes? Remember that we're called the United States of America. I urge those of you who are in doubt about that which you have read here and listened to here and watched here, to pray and pray again to be shown the truth of the matters in question. And then be alert for your answer, because it may come in a dream or from any other source. And when it comes, you're very likely to recognize it as your answer, if you're paying attention. We, as a people, must each find in the depths of our heart a way to seek greater tolerance and understanding of our fellow man, and greater acceptance, and through that understanding and acceptance learn to love our neighbors as ourselves, even if they may not be quite the same as we are. I remember the story of the elderly Native American gentleman walking in the wilderness with his grandson. He related to the grandson a story about a man who had within himself two raging wolves, one good and one evil, both fighting for his soul. The boy asked his grandfather which wolf would win. "The one that he feeds," says the grandfather. Let each of us learn from this story that we should nourish and feed within ourselves that which promotes and stands for love, patience, tolerance for others, humanitarianism, the spirit of the Good Samaritan, brotherhood, a oneness of spirit, and once again, love. If things should become seemingly, or even in fact, even more hopeless, and you wonder what is to be done, there are two things that I recommend as foremost. Pray, always including the words, "Let your will be done." then just continue to read in the Declaration of Independence from the end of the quote shown earlier above in this paragraph, in this statement that was taken from that document. And perhaps you will soon see what was suggested there by the very wise founding fathers of this great country, of what to do when things no longer work for the people. It is food for thought. I want to thank you for watching part 1 of this series of videos. Here in part 1, we've looked at our world from a more material point of view. In part 2, we will consider things from a more spiritual perspective, from a higher outlook. Again, I thank you for watching, and I encourage you to watch the videos in part 2 also. We have now come to the end of part 1 of our videos, and I hope to see the beginning of positive change for ourselves and for our countries. May I now, in closing, ask that you never forget that we are a diverse society. Our country is made up of citizens from many backgrounds, countries, and cultures, and that this is one of our greatest strengths. Our families came here from other shores and made their homes here. There are those who were here before us, and others who will come after us. We know that a great many changes are needed to make our country all that it has the potential to become. Those changes will someday be complete, and when that is done, I believe that it has been and will continue to be the destiny of this country, to welcome and embrace people of many diverse countries, cultures, races, and religions, and to help bring us all together to create what many of us believe, and what I believe, is the greatest country that the world has ever known. We have the ability to reach even greater heights. Let us embrace these principles as a nation and as a people, and reach out to offer these same principles to a world that is greatly in need of them. We're all grateful to be Americans and proud to be citizens of the world. And even knowing our countries and our world's imperfections, we're all very proud of America, and we are looking forward to being even more proud of our country and of its people and of our entire planet and its people. Let each of us live in such a way as to make certain that America and planet Earth live up to their full potential. And let's make America and the world and the God of our hearts proud of us. Again, I thank you. I am grateful for your watching this video. I'm grateful for your watching part 1, and I ask you to watch the videos in part 2. Again, thank you.